Hi guys, it's me again, Kenneth, and I'm making free videos to teach quality engineering step by step, and so that you can build real skills without paying expensive courses. So today, we're going to, talk about the ASQ Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. In our previous sessions, we covered the philosophies behind quality and management systems that deploy it. So today we cover something different in character, that is in ethics. So every profession is bound a code of ethics. Publishing a publishing a upholding standard of conduct is actually one of the defining marks of what makes a profession in the first place. So rather than a job. So here's the roadmap. So we look at the purpose of the governance of the ASQ Code of Ethics itself, the American Society Quality, who enforces it, and what happens when it's violated. Second, the fundamental principles behind the code. Third, we'll walk through the three sections of the code specific expectations in detail, like acting with integrity and honesty, demonstrating the responsibility, respect, and fairness, and safeguarding proprietary information while avoiding the conflicts of interest. Fourth, we'll connect ethics to the law, the EEO regulations, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And fifth, we'll cover the personal information protection, the PII, HIPAA, the HIPAA, and FERPA. Sixth, a detailed look at the 14 specific ethical issues raised by the technology. And seven, the OSHA regulations quality engineers most commonly encounter. And finally, the practical ethical guidelines for the engineers that can pull into more than you expect. Like, for example, interviewing a job candidate. So let's start why this code exists and how it is actually governed. Because the context matters before we get into the specific rules. The stated purpose, quoted directly on the screen, is to establish the global standards of conduct and behavior, and notice how broadly that the net is cast. It covers not just the ASQ members and the certificate holders, but anyone who may represent or even perceive to represent ASQ. That's deliberately wide scope. So the chapter also notes that all the applicable ASQ policies and the procedures should be followed in the addition to this code, and that the violation should be reported. So governance sits with the ASQ Professional Ethics and Qualification Committee, which is appointed annually by the ASQ Board of Directors. So their job is to interpret the code and apply it to the specific situations, including that may not be explicitly spelled out in the text itself, which means the judgment and the precedent matter here, not just the literal reading of the rules. There's an important and practical guardrail worth highlighting, like the differences in work style or personality should be addressed directly with the other person first before anyone escalates the situation into a formal ethics complaint. This prevents the ethics process from being weaponized over ordinary interpersonal friction that has nothing to do with the actual misconduct. And finally, the consequences. Disciplinary actions are commensurate with the seriousness of the offense. And at the most severe end, they can include the permanent revocation or certification and expulsion from the society. So that's a professional consequence. So losing a certification you may have spent years earning, which is exactly why this called real weight rather than a being aspirational language. Okay. And before listing specific expectations, ASQ lays out the six fundamental principles that everything else in the code flows from. It's worth treating this as the spirit of the law behind detailed rules that we will get into. So be honest and transparent. This is listed first for the for a reason. So nearly every specific expectation in the code is really just a principle applied to a particular situation. So avoid conflicts of interest and plagiarism, two very different problems grouped together because both involve claiming or benefiting something that is not fully honestly yours. So do not harm others, stated plainly, like without qualification. Treat them with respect, dignity, and fairness. So notice this is how people are treated. So not just what decisions are made. So be professional and socially responsible, extending the individual's conduct outward to how it reflects on the profession and on society more broadly. And finally, advance the role, the perception of the quality professional. So this principle is somewhat unique. So it's not just avoiding bad behavior, It's an affirmative duty to actively how the profession is seen and valued. So keep this six in mind as we go through the three detailed sections of expectation next. That is integrity and honesty, responsibility, fairness, and safeguarding information. Because each specific line item in those sections traces back to the one or more of these six principles. Okay, so this is the first three detailed expectation sections in the code, and it centers on integrity and honesty. So let's go through all the 5 points because each one addresses a distinct specific failure mode. So one, strive to uphold an advanced integrity, honor, and dignity of the profession. This is an active duty, not just a passive. Don't embarrass us or rule. So you're expected to actively build the profession's reputation, so not merely avoiding damage it. Two, be truthful and transparent in all professional interactions and activities. Note that the word all, this is not limited to the formal reports or official communications. Okay? So three, execute responsibilities and make decisions in an objective, factual, fully informed manner. So this is really about the intellectual honesty, guarding against decisions driven by bias, incomplete information, or convenience. Four is accurately represent your qualification, education, titles, affiliation, certifications, and do not mislead others. So this is very concrete, checkable standard, and don't claim a certification you don't hold. And don't inflate a title, don't imply an affiliation that doesn't exist. And five, only other services, advice, or assignments with your actual areas of competence, expertise, and training. So this one deserves emphasis because it's an easy trap for an eager professional to fall into saying yes to something outside your real experience because you want to help or you want the work can itself be an ethics violations. So even with good intentions, because the client or the employer is relying on a level of expertise that you don't have. So the second expectation section is about responsibility, respect, and fairness. And it's worth noticing that the ordering here. So safety comes first. So one, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of individuals, the public, and the environment. The word paramount is deliberate, so it means this outranks other consideration like cost, schedule, or convenience when there's a genuine conflict. Okay. Two, avoid conduct that unjustly harms or threatens the reputation of the society, its members, or the profession. So this connects as an individual personal conduct to the collective reputation of everyone else who shares that the professional identity. So three, do not intentionally cause harm through words or deeds and treat others fairly, courteously, with dignity, and without prejudice or discrimination. So this is the broadest anti-harm and anti-discrimination clause in the code. It explicitly covers both what you do and what you say. Four is act and the conduct in a professional and socially responsible manner, extending individual conduct into how business itself it is carried. So, and five is easy to overlook but genuinely important. So, allow diversity in the opinions and personal lives of others. This is a positive obligation to tolerate difference and not just avoid actively discriminating. It's asking professionals to, make room for other people's views and choices, even ones they personally disagree with. And as long as the choices are not themselves uh, vi- violating the code. So the third and the final expectation section covers the confidentiality, conflict of interest, and intellectual honesty. So all things that come up constantly for the quality professionals who routinely have an access to sensitive client, customer, or employer data. One, ensure that the protection and the integrity of the confidential information, a baseline duty of care over anything you're entrusted with. Two, do not use confidential information for personal gain. So this is the line between simply holding sensitive information and actually exploiting it. So even if you never disclose it to anyone else, using it to benefit yourself itself is a violation. So three, fully disclose and avoid any real perceived conflict of interest that could impair your objectivity or independence. So whether you're serving clients, customers, employers, or the society itself. Notice the word perceived. You don't need to be actually compromised for this to become a problem. If a reasonable outside observer would perceive a conflict, that itself needs to be disclosed and managed. 4 is give credit where it is due, a simple but frequently violated rule, especially in a team environment where it is easy for one's person name to end up attached to the collective work. And 5, do not plagiarize and do not use the intellectual property of others without permission. And when permission is obtained, document it. That documentation is requirement is important and practical. Verbal permission that is not recorded can become a dispute later. So the code specifically asks you to create a paper trail at the time permission that is granted and not after the fact when it is needed. Okay, so ethics doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it's reinforced by actual law, and the chapter highlights two specific legal frameworks. Quality engineers needs to understand this. So first, the EEO, the Equal Employment Opportunity Laws. So this chapter is direct about this. So quality engineers must be aware of the employment, employment opportunity and other related guidelines because their work and often their involvement in hiring or evaluating people, which we'll return to later in this deck, that is directly governed by them. Secondly, and given real emphasis in the text, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, often called the Sarbox or SOX. Here's the backstory. So because of the several instances of the large-scale corporate fraud at the turn of the century, think Enron era scandals like the US Congress passed this law which mandates a set of stringent requirements for how corporations report their financial information. So here's the genuinely interesting connective point for this chapter that is worth stating clearly because it reframes what SOX actually is. So SOX can be understood as quality assurance techniques applied to the corporate financial system. In other words, the same discipline of controls, verification, and accountability that quality engineers apply to a manufacturing process is now legally mandated for financial reporting. So the chapter explicitly says that SOX enhances the role of the quality engineering because it carries the same core concept, rigorous, verifiable, accountable process control from the quality arena into the financial arena. So the larger point underneath both of this is whether your work is governed by EEO or Sarbox or any other relevant statute, your behavior must be always such that no embarrassment comes to your supplier, your employer, whether that's subordinate, peers, or management. So your customer or yourself. So be polite and diplomatic, show respect to everyone, and in the end, be honest with yourself that you've acted fairly and legally. So ethical dilemmas arise constantly around technology, legislation, management, activity. And the chapter makes a nice, simple observation here. So some people have equated the very definition of quality and the definition of ethics with the same short phrase, you do the right thing. So that's a useful anchor to keep in mind as we go through the more technical material. So one major area of concern the chapter singles out is the managing identifiable information or the PII. So this includes like phone numbers, home addresses, social security numbers, and the credit card numbers. So the expectation is that industry policies, organizational policies, and government regulations all work together to protect this type of information from abuse, and those policies specifically need to cover encrypting the data, safeguarding it, and removing it from the computer databases when required. So data doesn't get to sit around indefinitely just because it was collected once. So two specific regulatory examples are given, one per major sector. In the medical industry, this is governed by HIPAA or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. In academia, the equivalent is FERPA or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So both exist for the same underlying reason. Certain sectors handle especially sensitive personal data as a routine of their business. Patient records in healthcare, student records in education, and Congress decided general purpose privacy norms were not sufficient protection for their specific context. So sector specific laws were created. So as a quality professional, if you're building or auditing information in the either of these six sectors, these are not optional considerations. So they are legal requirements layered directly on top of the ethical duty to safeguard confidential information we saw from Section C of the code. Okay. So the chapter lists a genuinely comprehensive set of 14 issues demanding a critical ethical attention specifically around computers, e-commerce, e-business, and new technology generally. So let's walk through all 14 because each addresses a distinct failure mode. and together they form a solid practical checklist. One and two are the most obvious, like the misusing employee computers for personal gain or pleasure and destroying others' property. The book specific examples are ejecting a virus or wiping out files. Three is using condoning the use of computers for fraudulent activities. Note that condoning is included, meaning looking the other way. Condoning, note that the condoning is included, so meaning looking the other way while someone else does not itself a violation. So not just doing it yourself. So four is violating individual and a company rights to privacy and confidentiality. So directly connecting back to PIA discussion. Five is omitting safeguard that protects users and data and ethical failure of emissions. So not just commissions. Six is infringing on copyrights and trademarks. So seven, failing to maintain a sufficient level of accuracy and completeness implied when the data is collected and stored in computer database. So essentially a data integrity duty. Eight is failing to make critical information known to appropriate decision makers in time to prevent a negative outcomes. So this is about timely escalation, not just eventual disclosure. So nine is failing to capture, manage, and make available critical knowledge to those who need it, a knowledge management duty. So 10 is failing to upgrade computer technology when it's needed. 11 is managing the retrieval of the data files from old or different software programs and versions. So this is a very practical, often overlooked technical depth issues. So 12 is dealing with the global employees, business, and markets. 13 is dealing with the legal requirements, including the safety, environmental regulations of different governmental groups across the geographical boundaries. 12 and 13 together capture the ethical complexity of operating across jurisdictions with different rules. And 14, ensuring that the usage quality of the technology itself and making sure people are actually trained to use it. Enrolling a new system without adequate training is on this list itself framed as ethical shortfall, so not just an operational one. So beyond the ethics codes and privacy law, engineers also need working awareness of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or the OSHA. Both federal and the state level agencies actively monitoring organization to ensure compliance with these rules. So this chapter points to Randall's practical guide to ISO 9000 for a more comprehensive list. But list six regulations as the most common ones engineers actually run into, and I will walk you through what each one covers. So 29 CFR 1910.95 covers the occupational noise exposure, essentially the ear protection requirements in loud industrial environments. So 29 CFR 1910120 covers the hazardous waste operation and emergency response. So it is irrelevant anywhere hazardous materials that are handled or spilled or exposure response plan that is needed. 29 CFR 1910132 covers the personal protective equipment generally. So it is the overarching PPE requirement. 29 CFR 1910133 covers the eye and face protection specifically. This is a more targeted regulation than the general PPE rule. 29 CFR 1910147 is the control of hazardous energy. So more commonly by its practical name, like lockout, tag out, the procedure that ensures machinery is properly shut down and can't be accidentally energized while someone is servicing it. And 29 CFR 1910 1200 covers the hazard communication. So it is essentially the requirement that hazardous materials are properly labeled and that safely data sheets are available to anyone who might be exposed. So the reason belongs in this ethics focus chapter is rather than a separate safety chapter, it connects directly back to the section B of the ASQ code we covered earlier, holding the paramount of safety, health, and welfare of the individuals that is listed in very specific expectation under responsibility, respect, and fairness. So OSHA compliance is really the ethical principle is given to, that has a legal teeth. So this slide covers something that surprises a lot of engineers. So ethical issues are not confined to the technical or financial decisions. The chapter specifically flags that the engineers often find themselves put into ethical issues usually handled by the management, and the concrete example is given interviewing potential new employees. So here's the warning stated directly in the text. So without the proper training, engineers could put themselves their employer at greater risk for lawsuits simply by asking inappropriate questions during the interview, often without any bad intent at all, just casual curiosity or an attempt at small talk. So the chapter gives four specific guidelines on the do side. Ask only job-related questions. At every question in the interview should trace back to something relevant to actually performing the role, and focus specifically on the competencies and skills required for the job in question. So keep the entire conversation anchored to the job relevant capability. On the don't side, do not ask about the age, race, national origin, marital status, or religion. This connects directly back to the EEO laws we covered earlier. So these are exactly the categories protected under the Equal Employment Opportunity Law, and asking about them, even innocently, can create a legal exposure. And avoid any small talk that is not related to the job that might feel overly rigid. So since small talk is normally how people build rapport, but the chapter point is that the casual conversation is precisely where protected category questions tend to slip in unintention. So asking like, for example, about someone's family, their weekend plans, or where they're originally from surface age, marital status, or national origin information that becomes illegally risk to have a record as part of the hiring decisions. So let's bring the whole chapter together with five closing points, and I'll expand each. So first, the ASQ Code of Ethics is enforced not just aspiration language in a handbook. The Professional Ethics and the Qualification Committee actively interprets and applies it, and consequence scales with the seriousness of the offense up to the permanent revocation of certification and expulsion from the society. So real professional stakes. So second, the code-specific expectation organized clearly into three duties: acting with integrity and honesty, demonstrating responsibility, respect, and fairness, and safeguarding proprietary information while avoiding conflicts of interest. So all 15 specific expectations we covered trace back to one of these three buckets, which themselves trace back to the six fundamental principles. Third is ethics does not stand alone or doesn't stand alone. It's reinforced and given legal teeth by the real statutes. EE law protecting against the discrimination, the Sarbanes-Oxley applying quality style controls to corporate finance, HIPAA and the FERPA, protecting the sensitive personal data in healthcare and education, and OSHA, protecting physical safety on the job. Fourth is technology has created an entirely new category of ethical terrain, and the 14 issues we walked through, from the data misuse and privacy violations to cross-border legal complexity and training gaps. So it shows just how broad that the terrain has become. And the fifth, even the tasks that feel soft or outside the quality engineer's core technical lane, like interviewing a job candidate, carry real and ethical and legal. So the lesson across the chapter is consistent. So quality engineers are professionals, are expected to act accordingly. So with federal law and the employer rules, and adding further requirements on top of the baseline of the ASQ code sets. So I hope I give you value for this lesson, and I'll see you soon with the next topic. Bye bye.